The morning sky over Dust Ridge Trail looked peaceful, with soft clouds drifting slowly above the hills. But for little Lila Mae Carson, nothing in the world felt peaceful that day. She sat quietly on the back of the wooden wagon, her legs swinging over the edge, clutching a small cloth satchel that held the only things she truly owned: a faded dress, a ribbon her father once gave her, and a small wooden horse he carved by hand. She kept her fingers wrapped around the wooden horse because it made her feel safe, even though everything else in her life had changed. Just 2 months earlier, Lila still had her father, a gentleman who always smiled at her no matter how hard life was. He used to say she was the sunshine of his days. But after he passed, the world had become confusing and cold. Her stepmother, Ruth, tried at first to look after her, though she never seemed comfortable with it. Ruth spoke kindly in front of neighbors, but when they were alone, her voice often grew sharp. Lila never knew if she had said something wrong or if Ruth was simply tired from working long hours to keep the household running. The wagon wheels rumbled over the rocky ground as the trail grew narrower. Lila watched the tall grass sway on both sides. She wished her father were riding beside her, talking about clouds or telling her stories about horses and faraway places. Instead, Ruth sat at the front of the wagon with her jaw stiff, her hands gripping the reins more tightly than usual. She didn't look back at Lila, not even once. Lila wiped dust from her cheek and tried to sit still. She didn't want to upset Ruth. She knew her stepmother had many worries. People in town talked about debts, about how the ranch Ruth had inherited from Lila's father needed repairs, and how the cattle numbers kept dropping. Lila heard some of these conversations, even though no one wanted her to hear them. She also heard neighbors whisper that taking care of a child required time and patience, 2 things Ruth did not seem to have. The trail grew even lonelier as they moved deeper between the hills. There were no other travelers, no ranch houses in sight, and only the sound of the wheels bumping over stones. Lila started to wonder where they were going. She wanted to ask, but she remembered the last time she had asked too many questions. Ruth had sighed loudly, telling her that talking was tiring, so Lila pressed her lips together and stayed quiet. After a while, the wagon slowed. Ruth pulled the reins, and the horses came to a stop. Lila lifted her eyes, expecting they might be resting the animals or checking something on the wagon, but Ruth stepped down quickly, her boots landing firmly on the ground. She brushed dust from her skirt, looking around as if searching for something. "Lila," she said, turning her head just enough to see the girl. Her voice was calm, but her expression was unusually tight, as though she had made a decision she didn't want to talk about. "Come down for a moment." Lila nodded and climbed off the wagon carefully, holding her satchel close. She felt a small flutter in her stomach, the kind she felt when she sensed something was not right. She looked up at Ruth, hoping for a smile, but Ruth didn't give one. "The wagon is too heavy on this part of the trail," Ruth said, though her tone sounded practiced, as if she had repeated the sentence to herself before saying it aloud. "I need to take something off. Just stand here for a minute." Lila followed the instructions and stepped aside, standing near a tall patch of grass. She watched Ruth walk back to the front of the wagon. Ruth didn't reach for any supplies or equipment. Instead, she climbed onto the seat and grabbed the reins. Lila blinked, confused. The horses shifted restlessly, sensing movement. Ruth gave them a small flick of the reins, and the wagon jerked forward slightly. Lila took a small step forward. "Ruth, do you need help?" she asked softly. Ruth didn't turn her head. She stared straight ahead, her shoulders lifted as if bracing herself. For a moment, Lila thought she saw something like guilt in the way Ruth's hands shook. But then Ruth tightened her grip. "You stay here," she said quickly. "I'll be back." Before Lila could respond, the wagon began to move, slowly at first, then faster. The horses trotted away down the trail, pulling the wagon along with them. Lila stood frozen in place, her small fingers gripping the strap of her satchel so tightly that her knuckles hurt. She watched Ruth's back grow smaller and smaller until the wagon turned a curve and disappeared behind a hill. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Lila had ever known. For a few minutes she simply stood there, waiting, expecting Ruth to come back around the bend and wave to her, telling her she had just forgotten something and would not leave her alone. She waited until her legs grew tired, and her heart began to sink deeper and deeper inside her chest. When the wind finally brushed against her hair and she still saw no sign of the wagon, she understood. Ruth wasn't coming back. She had left her there on purpose. Lila sat down slowly in the grass, her body trembling. She wasn't angry. She didn't even know how to feel anger yet. She only felt a deep confusion and a loneliness that made her eyes fill with tears. She wiped them away quickly because her father used to tell her that tears blurred the view of the world and she needed clear eyes to find her way. She looked around the trail. The tall grasses whispered softly, and birds chirped somewhere in the distance. The sun shone brightly, but it didn't warm her. She felt small, as though the world had grown too big for her to understand. She thought about walking, but she didn't know which direction would lead to safety. The trail behind her led back to the town she had left, but it was far. Too far for a child to reach before nightfall. The trail ahead was unknown, full of turns and hills she had never seen before. Lila stood up again and hugged her satchel. Her father always said, "When you don't know what to do, just take one small step." So she took one small step forward, then another. She didn't know where she was going, but doing nothing felt scarier. After walking for a while, her legs grew tired. The sun climbed higher, making the air warm and dry. Lila's throat felt tight from thirst, and her stomach rumbled. She thought about the meals she used to share with her father. He loved making simple soups, and he always served her first. The memory made her chest ache, but it also reminded her that she needed to keep going. She walked until the shadows of the hills stretched across the trail. Every sound around her seemed louder. The rustling bushes, the chirping insects, the distant call of a bird. She wasn't used to being alone in such a quiet place. Every once in a while she stopped and listened, half hoping she would hear wagon wheels in the distance, even though she knew she wouldn't. Her feet hurt. Her eyes felt heavy. She didn't have the strength to walk anymore. At the side of the trail she noticed an old fallen log covered with soft moss. It looked like a place she could rest, even for a little while. She walked toward it slowly and sat down, trying to steady her breathing. She thought about her father again and whispered, "I miss you," though no one was there to hear it. She leaned against the log. Her eyes drifted toward the sky, where the clouds moved gently, almost as if they were trying to comfort her. She took a slow breath, but the weariness in her tiny body was too much. Her eyelids grew heavy, and before long, she closed them, her small frame sinking into the soft grass beside the log. The trail was quiet except for the wind, and there, alone on the long stretch of Dust Ridge Trail, Lila fell asleep, unaware that help was already on its way. Help she could never have imagined. Lila lay quietly beside the fallen log, her small body curled like a leaf that had drifted out of place. The breeze moved gently across the trail, brushing through the tall grass and carrying the warm scent of earth and sunlight. The afternoon was growing older, and the shadows stretched long and soft across Dust Ridge Trail. Everything around her seemed peaceful. But inside her little heart, there was only confusion, fear, and exhaustion. Far away down the trail, the sound of hoofbeats echoed lightly, steady and calm. They belonged to a man who was known across the region, not because he showed off or boasted, but because people respected him. His name was Colton Reyes, a rancher whose land stretched farther than the eye could see. Some called him the wealthiest cowboy in the county, but for those who knew him personally, they believed his greatest wealth was his kindness. Colton was riding his horse, a tall chestnut named River. He often spent afternoons checking the fences along his ranch's borders or scouting for broken gates or wandering cattle. He liked these quiet rides. They gave him time to think, breathe, and feel the open air. He had grown up on the land, and every trail, stone, and tree felt familiar to him. That day, however, something unusual caught his attention. River slowed his pace on his own, lowering his head. Horses often sensed things before humans did. Colton looked down and gently patted the horse's neck. "What is it, boy?" he asked in a soft tone. River flicked his ears forward and took a few slow steps to the side of the trail. Colton followed the direction of the horse's gaze. At first, he saw nothing but grass and the uneven shape of the fallen log. But then he looked more closely and noticed a small figure lying in the shade. His eyebrows pulled together in concern. He guided River closer, careful not to startle whoever was there. As he approached, his heart tightened. He saw a little girl, no older than 8 or 9, sleeping against the log, her clothes dusty, her hair tangled from the wind. She was clutching a cloth satchel as if it were the most important thing in the world. Colton dismounted quickly but gently, landing softly on the ground. He didn't rush toward her. Instead, he walked slowly, stopping a few steps away so he wouldn't frighten her. "Hello there," he said in a warm, steady voice. "Are you all right?" Lila didn't respond. She didn't even stir. The way she lay made Colton realize she was deeply exhausted. He knelt down beside her and noticed how small her hands were, how pale her face looked, and how her shoes were worn from walking. He didn't see any adults nearby, no wagon, no horse, no sign that she belonged to anyone who might return. Colton felt a gentle ache in his chest. He had seen lost calves, injured animals, even travelers who needed help. But a child alone on a trail, that was something different. Something that pulled at him with quiet urgency. He reached into the saddlebag he always carried and took out a canteen of water. Then he held it near her lips. "Little one," he said softly, "can you hear me?" Lila's eyebrows twitched, and her eyes slowly fluttered open. She blinked several times before her gaze found Colton's face. At first, her expression was blank, as if her mind was still deciding whether she was awake or dreaming. Then fear flickered in her eyes. Not loud fear, but the quiet kind that hides deep inside a child's heart. "It's all right," Colton assured her gently. "You're safe. Here, have a sip." He tilted the canteen carefully, and Lila drank slowly. The cool water soothed her dry throat. She didn't realize how thirsty she had been until that moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so faint it barely reached his ears. Colton smiled kindly. "You're welcome. Do you feel a little better?" She nodded, though her eyes still held caution. "My name's Colton," he said. "What's yours?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the satchel. Then she said softly, "Lila." "That's a beautiful name," Colton replied. He didn't ask too many questions at once. He could see she was overwhelmed. Instead, he sat back a little to give her space. "Lila, how did you end up out here?" Her small shoulders lifted as she took a shaky breath. She looked down at her lap, her throat tightening with the memory she didn't know how to explain. I was with Ruth," she said quietly. "Is she your mother?" Colton asked gently. "No, my stepmother," Lila answered. "She said she needed to stop the wagon, and then she left." Her voice broke slightly, though she tried to stay calm. "I waited for her to come back, but she didn't." Colton's eyes softened with deep sympathy. He didn't show shock on his face because he didn't want to make her feel worse. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if he simply wanted her to know he heard her and believed her. "That sounds very hard," he said in a comforting tone. "I'm sorry that happened." Lila's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cry in front of a stranger. Colton gently placed his hat on his knee. "You're not alone anymore, all right? I'll help you." Lila looked up at him as if she wasn't sure she heard correctly. You will?" "Yes," he said, kindness steady in his eyes. "I promise." She took a small breath. Fragile but hopeful, Colton stood and offered her his hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm and safe. My ranch isn't far." She stared at his hand for a moment. Then, slowly, she placed her tiny hand in his. He lifted her gently to her feet, making sure she didn't stumble. River watched quietly, his ears twitching. Colton lifted Lila into the saddle, then climbed up behind her so she wouldn't fall. She held the saddle horn tightly as River began walking down the trail, steady and calm. As they rode, Lila leaned back slightly, feeling the warmth of someone who wasn't leaving her behind. For the first time since her father passed, she felt a small sense of safety beginning to return. The ride to Reyes Ridge took some time, but Lila didn't mind. She watched the land stretch out before her, wide-open fields, rolling hills, sparkling patches of sunlight, and birds gliding gracefully in the sky. It felt like a different world from the one she had left behind. When they reached the ranch, Lila's eyes widened. The house was large but welcoming, with its front porch, big windows, and rocking chairs that gently swayed in the breeze. Behind it, endless fields spread out with cattle grazing peacefully. A gray-haired woman with kind eyes named Martha, the ranch housekeeper, stepped outside when she saw them approaching. "Colton Reyes," she called out. "You're back early. Did something happen?" Colton carefully lifted Lila off the horse before answering. "I found her alone on Dust Ridge Trail," he explained. "She needs a place to rest." Martha brought her hands to her mouth in gentle shock. "Oh, you poor child," she said softly, rushing forward. "Come inside, sweetheart. Let's get you something warm to eat." Lila felt shy, but she followed Martha because her voice reminded her of comfort she thought she had lost. Inside the house, everything smelled like fresh bread and warm stew. The furniture was soft, the walls were decorated with simple artwork, and the windows let sunlight spill across the floors. It felt like a safe place. Martha wrapped Lila in a warm blanket and guided her to a chair at the table. "I'll bring you something gentle on the stomach," she said, smiling kindly. Colton sat nearby so Lila wouldn't feel abandoned again. "You're safe here," he repeated, his tone calm. "We'll figure everything out." Lila nodded, feeling the words settle inside her heart like a soft, warm light. After she ate, her eyelids drooped with exhaustion. Martha prepared a small guest room for her, a quiet space with a soft bed, a clean quilt, and a window that opened to a view of the sunset. Lila lay down carefully. She clutched her wooden horse from her satchel, holding it close to her chest. When she closed her eyes, she felt a peaceful heaviness replace the fear she had carried all day. Outside the room, Colton spoke quietly with Martha. "I'll talk to the sheriff in the morning," he said. "A child doesn't end up alone on a trail without reason." Martha nodded. "You did the right thing bringing her here." Colton glanced toward the small room where Lila slept. "She deserves kindness," he said softly, "and a chance to feel safe again." That night, for the first time since losing her father, Lila slept without fear. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. The morning sun rose slowly over Reyes Ridge Ranch, sending soft golden light across the fields. Birds chirped near the windows, and a gentle breeze moved the curtains in the small guest room where Lila slept. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling the warmth of the blanket around her and the softness of the pillow beneath her cheek. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, but then the scent of breakfast drifted in from the kitchen, and she remembered the kind cowboy who had brought her here. She sat up carefully, holding the wooden horse carved by her father. The room felt peaceful. Nothing like the cold fear she had felt while alone on Dust Ridge Trail. Her heart still hurt, but she felt just a little bit braver than the day before. After washing her face and straightening her clothes, she stepped into the hallway. Martha noticed her right away and smiled warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart," Martha said. "Did you sleep well?" Lila nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." "You don't have to call me ma'am," Martha chuckled gently. "Just call me Martha." Colton was already at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of warm coffee. When he saw Lila, he set his cup down and smiled. "Good morning, Lila. I'm glad to see you awake." Lila smiled back, though shyly. "Good morning." Martha placed a plate in front of her, warm toast with butter and a bowl of fruit. Lila ate slowly, tasting each bite like it was a treasure. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so safe while eating. After breakfast, Colton stood up and took his hat from the hook near the door. "I need to ride into town and speak with the sheriff," he said to Martha. Then he turned to Lila. "Would you like to stay here with Martha? I won't be long." Lila hesitated. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to cause trouble. She looked at the wooden floor and spoke softly. "Are you coming back?" Colton's heart softened. He knelt down so he could meet her eyes. "Of course I'm coming back," he said gently. "You're safe here, and I won't leave you." Those words settled into her heart like a warm blanket. She nodded slowly. After Colton left, Martha kept Lila busy with small, gentle tasks. She showed her how to help feed the chickens behind the house and how to gather eggs without cracking them. At first, Lila's hands shook a little. She was afraid of doing something wrong, but Martha guided her patiently. "There you go," Martha said with pride. "You're a natural." Lila's face brightened with a small, shy smile. It felt good to be useful. It felt good to be trusted. As the sun rose higher, Lila followed Martha to the barn where the ranch hands were getting ready for their day's work. The men greeted Lila kindly, tipping their hats or offering warm smiles. None of them asked hard questions. They simply treated her like she belonged. One of them, a tall man named Henry, gently lifted a small pony from its stall. The pony was brown with a white patch on its forehead. "This little one is gentle as a summer breeze," Henry said. "Would you like to brush her?" Lila's eyes widened with wonder. She nodded eagerly. Henry handed her a brush. "Just like this," he said, showing her slow, gentle strokes. Lila ran the brush through the pony's soft coat. The pony nuzzled her shoulder, making her giggle for the first time in a long while. It was a small sound, but it made Martha smile from across the barn. As the hours passed, Lila began to feel something she hadn't felt since losing her father. A sense of belonging. A sense that she wasn't invisible. Every person she met at the ranch spoke kindly to her and gave her space to breathe. It felt like she had stepped into a place where the world wasn't so frightening. Later in the afternoon, Colton returned from town. He walked into the barn just as Lila was brushing the pony's tail. She looked up when she heard his boots on the ground, and her face lit up with quiet relief. "There you are," he said softly, glad to see her smiling. "Did everything go okay?" Martha asked him. Colton nodded. "I spoke to the sheriff," he said. Then he glanced at Lila, careful not to alarm her. "We'll talk later, but everything is being handled properly." Lila didn't understand everything, but she could tell from his gentle tone that he wasn't upset. That was enough for her heart to feel lighter. Over the next few days, Lila slowly settled into life at Reyes Ridge Ranch. Each day brought new experiences. She learned how to help Martha slice vegetables for supper, how to sweep the porch, how to feed the horses, and how to fold laundry neatly. She wasn't strong enough for heavy work, but every small task she completed made her feel important. Colton often watched her from a distance as she worked. He admired her quiet determination. Despite everything she had gone through, she was gentle, patient, and thoughtful. If she dropped something, she would quickly pick it up. If she made a mistake, she would fix it without complaint. And if someone praised her, she would blush softly, unused to being noticed. In the evenings after dinner, Colton liked to sit on the porch with a warm cup of tea. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lila walked outside and stood near the porch rail. She held her wooden horse close to her chest. "Do you like the sunset?" Colton asked. Lila nodded. "My father used to say the sky looks happiest at this time." Colton's eyes softened. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Lila whispered. "He always made me feel safe." "You deserve to feel safe," Colton said. "Every child does." Lila looked down at the wooden boards beneath her feet. I didn't think I would again." Colton gently placed his hand on the railing beside hers, not touching her but close enough for her to feel supported. "Sometimes life brings us to places we didn't expect," he said softly. "And sometimes those places turn out to be better than what we lost." Lila didn't answer right away. She simply watched the colors of the sky melt from pink to orange to gold. In town, however, something else was happening. After Colton reported Lila's situation, the sheriff began looking into the truth. Neighbors spoke about Ruth, about the ranch she struggled to manage, and about the way she had spoken of Lila as extra responsibility. When the sheriff questioned Ruth, she insisted that Lila had run off on her own, but her story didn't match the details, and witnesses along the trail confirmed seeing the wagon leave without stopping for long. Soon, the sheriff returned to Reyes Ridge with more information. Colton met him at the gate, keeping Lila safely inside the house with Martha. "The child's stepmother won't be taking her back," the sheriff said firmly. "It's clear she cannot provide a safe place for her." Colton nodded slowly. "What happens next?" "She'll need a guardian," the sheriff said. "A stable home, someone responsible and caring." Colton didn't say a word right away. He looked toward the house, where he knew Lila was helping Martha knead dough for dinner. He thought about the way she laughed softly when a horse nuzzled her hand. He thought about how carefully she placed her shoes by the door so she wouldn't track dirt inside. He thought about the way her eyes lit up when he came back from town each day, as though she finally believed someone wasn't going to disappear. After a moment, Colton said quietly, "I'll do whatever she needs." The sheriff looked at him with a knowing smile. "That's what I thought you'd say." When Colton stepped back into the house, Lila looked up from the kitchen counter. Her hands were covered in flour, and there was a small smudge on her cheek. She looked young, fragile, and hopeful all at once. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Colton nodded. "I'm fine." He didn't tell her everything yet. He wanted to make sure she felt secure before sharing the next steps. But as he watched her return to her dough with gentle concentration, he felt something shift quietly inside his heart. He hadn't expected it. He hadn't planned for it. But he cared for her deeply, more deeply than he expected. She had become part of his days, part of the ranch, part of the quiet spaces in his life where loneliness used to sit. As the evening settled in and lamps were lit throughout the house, Lila finished helping Martha clean up. Then she walked toward her small room, carrying her wooden horse close to her heart. Before she went inside, she turned to Colton, who was leaning against the hallway wall. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. Colton smiled softly. "You're welcome, Lila. Rest well." As she closed the door behind her, he felt a warm, steady certainty. She was meant to be here, and he would do everything in his power to make sure she stayed safe, cared for, and never alone again. The days at Reyes Ridge Ranch began to follow a gentle rhythm, like a song that played softly in the background of Lila's new life. Every morning, she woke to the peaceful hum of ranch work, the distant whistle of a ranch hand, the soft lowing of cattle, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Each day felt a little less frightening than the day before, and a little brighter, too. Colton noticed the change in her. When she first arrived, she walked quietly, her shoulders slightly lowered, like she wasn't sure she deserved space in the world. Now she moved with more confidence, still gentle, still calm, but with a quiet hope that hadn't been there before. One morning, as the sun spread soft gold over the land, the sheriff rode up to the ranch gate. The dust behind his horse rose like a small cloud, and his hat shaded his eyes from the sunlight. Colton stepped outside to greet him, wiping his hands on a cloth because he had been fixing a fence post. "Morning, Sheriff," Colton said. "Morning," the sheriff replied. His voice was steady but carried a hint of finality. "I came with the last piece of news about the girl." Colton straightened, knowing this was important. "Go ahead." The sheriff took a slow breath. "After reviewing everything, it's clear the child cannot return to her stepmother. The home environment isn't suitable for her. It's decided." Colton nodded. He had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud made his chest tighten with both relief and sadness, for what Lila had gone through, and for what she had lost. "She'll need a permanent home," the sheriff continued. "A real one." Colton's gaze drifted toward the house. Through the window, he could see Lila helping Martha set the breakfast table. She was arranging spoons carefully, making sure each one lined up perfectly with the plate. "I'd like to adopt her," Colton said softly, as though speaking a truth he had already carried inside long before this moment. The sheriff didn't look surprised. In fact, he smiled a little. "I thought you might say that. The paperwork is ready. It just needs your signature. And hers." "Hers?" Colton asked. "She gets a choice," the sheriff explained. "Where she lives? Who she lives with? It should be her decision, too." Colton nodded slowly. Of course. He looked back at the house again, thinking about how much courage it would take for a child who had been left behind to trust a new adult with her future. He wanted her to choose him only if she felt safe, not because she thought she had no other option. "I'll talk to her," Colton said. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Take your time. I'll wait on the porch." Inside the kitchen, Lila was carefully placing napkins beside each plate. Martha watched her with fond eyes. "You're quite the helper," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Lila smiled shyly. "I like helping." At that moment, Colton stepped inside the kitchen. He didn't rush or speak too quickly. Instead, he leaned slightly against the doorframe, trying to gather his thoughts. Martha sensed that something important was about to happen, and excused herself to check on the bread baking in the oven. "Lila," Colton said softly. She turned toward him with her usual gentle expression. "Yes?" "Could you come sit with me for a moment?" he asked. She nodded and followed him to the living room. He sat in the rocking chair beside the window, and she sat on the small couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sunlight touched her hair, making it glow softly. Colton took a slow breath. "The sheriff is here. He has news about your future. I wanted to talk to you before we go outside to meet him." Lila's fingers tightened a little. Her heart fluttered with nervousness, though she didn't know exactly why. Colton spoke gently, choosing every word with care. The sheriff made a decision. You won't be going back to live with your stepmother. You're not required to return to that house. Lila didn't move. She didn't smile, and she didn't frown. She just sat very still. The news settled inside her like a pebble dropping into deep water. She had known this was possible, maybe even likely, but hearing it said aloud made her chest feel strange, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. After a quiet moment, she whispered, "Then where will I go?" Colton leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "That's what I wanted to ask you. You deserve a home where you feel safe and cared for. The sheriff says you can choose who you want to live with." He paused, giving her space. "If you want," he said softly, "you can stay here, with me, at this ranch. I would be honored to adopt you, Lila, but the choice is yours, only yours." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't a heavy silence. It was gentle, thoughtful. Lila looked down at her hands, feeling the warmth of the room around her. She thought about the days she had spent here, the kindness she had been shown, the warmth of Martha's cooking, the soft nuzzle of the ponies, the steady rhythm of ranch life, and the way Colton always kept his word. She thought about Dust Ridge Trail, the cold sky, and the moment she realized the wagon wasn't coming back for her, how small she had felt, how alone. Then she thought about the moment Colton had lifted her onto his horse, how warm his coat had felt around her, how safe she had been for the first time in a long time. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and fear. "If I stay here, will you stay too?" Colton's heart softened completely. "I'm not going anywhere," he said gently. "Not now, not later. If you choose to stay, you'll never have to face anything alone again." A small tear slid down Lila's cheek, not a tear of pain, but of relief. She wiped it quickly with the back of her hand and nodded. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to stay with you." Colton felt something warm bloom inside him, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He smiled, slow and steady, and placed his hand gently on the arm of the couch near her, not touching her, but close enough to let her feel supported. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've made me very proud." Together, they walked out to the porch where the sheriff waited. He watched the two step outside and saw the calm certainty in Lila's expression and the steady warmth in Colton's. "I take it she's made her choice," the sheriff said. "Yes," Lila replied quietly. "I want to stay here." "Then we'll make it official," the sheriff said with a satisfied nod. He handed Colton the papers and guided them through each signature. When Lila signed her name, her letters were small and careful, but her heart felt bigger than it had felt in a long time. Once everything was completed, the sheriff tipped his hat. "Congratulations, both of you. Looks like you've become a family today." Lila felt a strange but wonderful warmth in her chest. A family. The word felt like a soft blanket around her heart. She looked up at Colton, who smiled down at her with the quiet pride of someone who had been given a gift he didn't expect, but deeply cherished. After the sheriff left, Martha came running outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well?" she asked eagerly. "It's official," Colton said, smiling. Martha clapped her hands together with joy. "Oh, Lila, honey, I'm so happy for you." Lila felt shy with all the attention, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: belonging. That evening, Colton saddled 2 horses, River for himself and a smaller pony named Clover for Lila. The air was cool and pleasant, the sky wide and painted with shades of orange and purple. "Ready for a ride?" Colton asked. Lila nodded eagerly. She climbed onto Clover with careful excitement, and Colton rode beside her. They moved slowly across the ranch fields, the wind brushing their cheeks, the land stretching wide and beautiful before them. It felt like freedom. It felt like home. As they rode side by side, the last sunlight glowed behind them. Lila held the reins tightly and smiled, a real, bright smile that came from a heart finally safe. She wasn't an abandoned girl anymore. She wasn't lost. She had a family. She had a place in the world. And she had a father who chose her not out of duty, but out of love. Whatever the future held, she wouldn't face it alone. She was home, at last.